Well, good evening, MPC, and welcome to our online visitors, and welcome to our online Bible study. As you know, as part of our Bible study, we have a thought to think about, a question to ponder, and a text to study. And during the week, if you get opportunity to meet up with other people in your life group, grab a coffee, feel free to study a passage of scripture together, which I'll give you at the end of this, or discuss a question amongst yourselves, just as a way of developing your own learning as we go through the Bible together. Well, as you know, for the last few weeks, we've been doing a series of teaching on angels and demons. And initially, for the first few weeks, we were looking at the good guys or the angels. But this time, we're going to look at the bad guys or the demons. And as you know, we've said that angels and demons are created spiritual beings that are able to make moral choices, moral decisions. They have a high intelligence, but they don't have a body. And I think it's important for us to be aware of this, that they are created spiritual beings. And we said that angels are working for God's purposes in our world, whereas demons are working against God's purposes in our world. And I think in understanding this, it's important to realize that many people, when we talk about the subject of fallen angels or demons, they can have an inordinate sense of fear towards them. Really, we should not fear them because they are created beings like us. Whereas God is really the one we should fear. He is the one that we really should respect and honor because God is an uncreated being, whereas demons are created beings. And we've seen that demons are working against the purposes and the plan of God in our world. And so if I was to define what we mean by demons, I would say this, that they are evil or unclean angels or spirits who have sinned against God and who now continually work evil harm in the world. Now, the question I want us to look at this evening is, how did these creatures actually come about? Well, we know that at the very beginning of creation, we read in Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, that when God created everything, he saw that everything that he was made was good, and behold, it was very good. And so it would seem incompatible with the idea that when God created everything at the beginning and it was all good, that at that time that demons or Satan was made. But it's very clear that a few verses later, when we come to Genesis chapter 3, that Satan is in the garden in the form of a serpent, tempting Eve to go against God's will. And so very clearly something happened from the end of chapter 1 and verse 31 to the beginning of chapter 3 and verse 1 in the book of Genesis, where there was obviously clearly a rebellion of some angels against God. I don't know if any of you have ever read John Milton's classic work of poetry, Paradise Lost. But he describes something of the cosmic struggle, the battle that was going on in the heavens when Satan and his angels rebelled against the purpose of God. But the Bible is clear that at some point in the past, there was a rebellion in heaven against God. Peter speaks of it in the New Testament when he says, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them in chains of darkness or gloomy dungeons to be held for judgment." Again, Jude also adds that, "And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority but abandoned their proper dwelling, these he kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for the judgment day, for the great judgment day." The emphasis is on the fact that these angelic hosts, these angelic beings, once had a place in heaven, once had a place in God's kingdom, where they viewed God's glory. But because of the hostility towards God, they lost their place in heaven and actually were bound in dark places or gloomy chains. So that means that God has restricted their movement in this universe. Now, why did these angels, why did they lose their place in heaven? Well, both from the words of Peter and Jude, it would appear that the sin of pride was at the root of all of this. They refused to accept that there are assigned places that were assigned to them by God. And as a result of that, because of pride, they lost their place in God. It seems that pride isn't just a problem amongst human beings, amongst us, but even among angels. Now, the head of these unfallen angels, as we know, was Satan. And Satan lost his heavenly place because of pride. In fact, the prophet Isaiah, in the 14th chapter, when speaking of God's judgment against the king of Babylon, describes a language that seems to be referring to something more than just merely a human king. Listen to what the Lord says to the prophet Isaiah. It says, "You have fallen from heaven, morning star," or Lucifer, "son of the dawn. You have been cast down to earth. You who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to the realm of the dead, to the depths of the pit." Do you notice something about that text, that Satan's name used to be Lucifer, morning star? That's what he was. He was created originally good. But you can see that because of pride, Satan lost his place in heaven. In fact, 5 times Satan or Lucifer says, I will, I will, I will, I will, I will, I will. Satan or Lucifer wanted to put himself in God's place. Did not want to worship God for who God was, but desired to take God's place in his heart. And what this shows is that God originally created demons good. As we saw at the beginning in Genesis, that everything that God created was good. But like us, he gave them a free will, whether they could freely choose to worship God or freely choose to rebel against God. And it would seem that even though God created them good, they chose out of their will to rebel against God's purposes. And they joined Lucifer. The Bible suggests that about 1/3 of the angels joined with Satan in their rebellion against God. And so this changed them from being good angels to actually being harmful, malevolent, and distorted spiritual beings who are now working against the purposes and the plan of God in our universe. Now, in a moment, I want us to look at the meanings of the head of these fallen angels, Satan. I'm going to look at what his name means, both his name as Satan and as the devil. But, the Bible often describes the devil in a number of terms. Sometimes it describes him as the serpent, or Beelzebub, or the ruler of the world, or the prince of the power of the air, or the evil one. And what this shows is the various titles that the devil has depicts something of his work in our world. And Satan and his demons are at work trying to distort all the purpose and plan of God in our world. That's why we see so much evil in the world. That's why we see so much destruction in the world. It's because behind the natural world there is a spiritual world. There's an evil, malevolent spiritual force that's acting against God's purpose. And sometimes demons and Satan have sway over the influence of people's decisions and choices. Maybe remember the time when Jesus said that he had to go to the cross. And as he was having that conversation, Peter rebuked Jesus and said that, no, you can't go to Jerusalem. And remember what Jesus' response was to Peter. Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." What Jesus' words reveal is that Peter, though Peter wasn't aware of it, behind Peter's rebuke to Jesus actually wasn't Peter's idea. It was actually the influence of Satan himself that was the source of Peter's words to Jesus at that time. And so without him even realizing it, Peter was doing Satan's work for him. I want you to think about that for a moment, because that's actually quite a sobering thought. Sometimes, without us even realizing it, we could possibly be doing Satan's work for him. And that brings us to the meaning of his name, Satan and the devil. The meaning of Satan's name means accuser or adversary. And you remember the story in the book of Job when Satan appeared before God with all the angelic hosts, and God asked Satan to consider his servant Job, and Satan could not believe that Job would be good for goodness sake. He couldn't believe that he'll be good because it's the right thing to do. He thought that Job would only be good because of what he got out of his relationship with God. And so Satan came to accuse Job in God's presence. And that's what Satan does. He just loves to accuse people. In fact, there's a text in the book of Zechariah where it says that Joshua, the high priest, was standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan was standing at his right side to accuse him. Satan is an accuser. I remember a number of years ago just being accused by someone, and it was a very personal attack against me. And I remember the hurt that accusation brought against me in my own heart. And what was really interesting is that the day that person accused me, and actually in a very public way, that very day I actually read this text in the book of Zechariah. I think it may have been the following day. And I realized that actually this person may have not even realized it, but actually behind the accusation is actually the voice of the accuser, or Satan, the spiritual force that seeks to accuse all of us here in the presence of God. But as we know, not only does Satan have the title of Satan, but also of the devil. In fact, this is the title that's often used throughout the New Testament. The Greek word diabolos, from which we get the word diabolical, it literally means to be a slanderer. To be a slanderer, to actually degrade and pull someone else down. Can I encourage you, church, and for all those who are listening into this, make sure that you never ever use your tongue to accuse someone else. Never ever use your mouth to slander other people. Because without you being aware of it, you are actually doing the devil's work for him. And so let's guard our hearts from that. Let's be aware of that. So we've looked at this evening who demons are, who the devil is, and how they actually came into this world, how they came into existence. We've seen that it was because of pride that they lost their place in heaven. But I want to encourage you that you are not to fear them. They are created beings like us. The only real person that you are to fear, truly fear, is God, who is the creator of the heavens and the earth. Well, that's our thought to think about. I want to give you a question to ponder. And the question is a bit one of those searching, deep questions, the honest question for us to think about. But the question is, have there ever been times in your life where you have said something where maybe you was doing the devil's work without realizing it? That's a really pointed question, I know, but I'm going to say that again. Have there ever been times in your life where you have said something without realizing it, where you've done the devil's work? I know that's a pointed question. And the text I'd like you to read Isaiah chapter 14. And I want you particularly to focus on verses 12 to 15. And I want you to discuss this in your groups or with other people and ask yourselves, how can you guard your heart from pride? How can you guard your heart from pride? Well, thank you for spending this time with our online Bible study. A little bit of a different location this time, but hope you have a great rest of the evening. Hope to see you again later on in the week. God bless you and have a great rest of the day. And don't forget, we've got our Zoom prayer meeting tonight. If you want to get into that prayer meeting, drop me an email, info@mpconline.org. I'll send you the details. Hey, listen, have a great rest of the day and evening. God bless you.